Good morning, Froggy here. Today we are going to install a clutch slave cylinder in this 1995 BMW M, and there it is. There's the clutch slave cylinder. We're going to put the car up, get underneath, install it. We're going to bleed it, and we're going to have a better clutch, I hope. Okay, here we've got the car jacked up in the front. Be careful. Put a chock in back of the back wheels and put some jack stands underneath. Okay, you could do this on ramps, but I think I've got it up a little bit higher using my floor jacks. There's our slave. You can see the bleed nipple up there. The slave is just above this bundle of wires here that we're going to move out of the way. Okay, we've got the clutch slave out. I put it next to the new one. You can see the new one's got a lot more extension or throw in the relaxed position, so I'm hoping that's going to mean when I install it I don't have to push the clutch pedal quite as far down towards the firewall. That's the whole point of this this repair. There you can see the hydraulic line. I've got it tied off to a cross member on the chassis. What I did was I took off the bottom nut first. It's also attached to a bracket. You can see the bracket. Yeah, you can see the bracket hanging there. There's a hold-off bracket for the hydraulic line. Then I took the flare nut off to give me some room. You should use a special wrench for that so you don't bugger it up. This is a flare nut wrench. And then I took the top nut off that holds the clutch slave. The top one's the hardest one to get to. It's kind of tight in there, but you can do it. The nuts are 13 millimeter and the flare nut is an 11 millimeter. Okay, here's the new slave that's installed. You can see the little rubber cap on the bleed screw. You can see the hydraulic line connection, and it's got two bolts that attach it to the flywheel housing. Now here's how I put it back in. Your mileage may vary, but I bled the slave. I put it together. I put the hydraulic line on, and then I bled it with a reverse bleed from underneath the car, and I'll show you a little bit more about that later. So anyway, it's fully bled before I bolted it on with the two bolts. Remember, there's that bracket that has to line up with the lower bolt hole, so make sure you swing that bracket around. It never has to come off of the hydraulic line, but swing it around so it lines up with the lower bolt hole on the slave cylinder. And then what I did was I compressed the whole thing. It's got a spring inside, and it's also got a little bit of hydraulic pressure maybe. So you have to compress it. You have to push on it with your hand, with one hand, to get it onto the two studs that you're going to screw the nuts onto. So that's a little tricky to do. I'll say that right up front. But if you can do it, then I used a little pry bar to hold it in place, and then I caught the top screw first because that was the easiest one to get on. I used a long extension to reach up there and get the top screw caught first, and I got that about halfway screwed down, and that holds the slave in place. Once that holds the slave in place, and you can drop the pry bar that you're using to hold it up there, you can catch the other nut, and then you can snug them both down. and that's it. Just make sure that your hydraulic line fitting is tight and your bleed screw is tight. Don't tighten them up too much, you'll strip them, especially that bleed screw. Just put a little bit on that. And I already went up and tested the pedal. I've got a nice firm pedal. No problems with the bleed. So doing the bleed from underneath and doing it before you install the cylinder is one way to do it. The other way to do it is to install the cylinder and then do the bleed. Then you still have to overcome the spring pressure, so it's still a little tricky to get in there. I would try it this way first, and if you can't catch those two lugs and get the nuts started, then disconnect the hydraulic line, and you'll have to do the bleed later on. Okay, you want to have a little pan to catch some of the drips. There's really not a lot of fluid that's going to get drip out when you're disconnecting on a clutch slave. There's not much fluid in there. Now, this is what I use to do the reverse bleed. I think it's called a Phoenix V12. I don't know, there's a lot of versions around. You have to have the sucking end has to be totally immersed in the brake fluid. Don't get any bubbles here or you're losing the whole point of the thing. This has to be all fluid, no bubbles. So it sucks here, it pushes out there. This end attaches, that end right there attaches to the bleed screw on the clutch. Now here's why reverse bleeding works so well. Bubbles want to go up. Bubbles don't want to go down. Think about it last time you were in a swimming pool. Bubbles go up. So by reverse bleeding from the lowest part of the system, you're just pushing those bubbles up the way they want to go anyway, right? If you bleed from the top, you're trying to push the bubbles down. The bubbles want to go up, you're trying to push them down, up, down, up, down. So a reverse bleed really works pretty well for this. You can do it on brakes too. Yeah, I got a good bleed first time. Pedal's good. I'm going to drop the car down now and take it for a ride. I can press the clutch pedal down and move the shifter in and out of all gears. That's what you want to do before you start the car. Make sure it's in neutral, and so on and so forth. Okay, test drive is over. We're done. Got a good bleed on the first time. Clutch feels good. Shifting good. This is it. And I hope you liked my do-it-yourself.